What does it take to build a civilization from nothing? No allies, no tools, no map, and no second chances.
The answer starts with a man falling from the sky at 60 meters per second, with only a system and a mind sharp enough to use it. He was 20 years old, and the last thing he remembered before the white flash was a reactor in Novosibirsk. Between that flash and the blue sky above him, there was nothing. No transition, no explanation, no warning. The system activated before he hit the water, calculating the distance to the surface with cold precision. At 200 meters, it identified the lake below and calculated the optimal entry angle in under a second. He straightened his body into a vertical line, because physics makes no exceptions, not even for people who have just died. At 80 meters, the system mapped the shore, the jungle, and 3 columns of smoke rising from different points on the horizon. At 30 meters, he had just enough time to think that water at this speed hits like concrete. He entered the water, and the impact drove every bit of air from his lungs. Darkness swallowed him for 3 seconds, but his hands were already pulling him upward through the black. The surface broke open in sunlight, and he gulped for air while the system interface blinked alive in the corner of his vision. Subject 1. Foundation Island. 0 readings across all lines, and a single live dot on an empty map. He reached the shore in 2 minutes and lay on the grass, while his body checked itself, joint by joint, muscle by muscle. 8 seconds later, the system displayed its result. No injuries. He found that strange, because he had been dead in Novosibirsk and was now alive here, and the system saw no contradiction in that at all. He gave himself 30 seconds to accept the fact, then set aside the question of the system's nature until it became urgent. 3 columns of smoke meant 3 sources of fire, and 3 sources of fire meant 3 groups of people on this island. The system was already plotting hypothetical control zones, northern, eastern, and southern, forming a perfect triangle. He stood, wrung the water from his clothes, and assessed his position immediately. The lakeshore was completely open, which made him visible from every direction at once. An unarmed person standing in the open is not a subject in any system of power. He is an object. The jungle began 15 meters away, and he moved toward it without hesitation, the system logging every step as a coordinate. The smell hit him first, damp and heavy, with the sound of moving water somewhere close. He found the stream in 9 minutes, and the system analyzed a water sample and returned its verdict in exactly 8 seconds. Drinking water standards confirmed. Bacterial contamination low. He lay on his stomach, drank slowly, and thought fast. 3 tribes, 0 resources, 0 technology, and 30 days until the first resupply, according to the system's terms. Then voices rose from the east, and the system placed a red marker on the map before he had even registered the sound. He pressed himself behind a thick tree trunk, and the voices came in rhythm, like a chant or a ritual. At least 8 people moving through the thicket 25 meters away. The system began recording and assigned a tag, Unknown Tribe 1. 9 men with spears tipped with burnt bone, and the leader carrying raw iron ore on his shoulder. He smiled quietly because the island's resource map was taking shape right before his eyes. They passed 20 meters away, and no one turned their head. The jungle swallowed them in 3 minutes, and the system added their route to the map. A hypothetical base appeared in the northeast, with the word iron and a question mark beside it. They thought they controlled this island, but they didn't know the island had just gained a new architect with 0 data and unlimited patience. He returned to the stream and began surveying the bank, because the first night on this island allowed no retakes. Silicon stones found in 12 minutes, dry wood in another 8. The technology log opened its first entry. Basic fire. Status unlocked. He started the fire in 9 minutes, and the system recorded it without ceremony. Building a shelter from palm leaves consumed the rest of the daylight, and the system added temporary shelter to the log. Civilization progress. 0.3%. The number looked small, but he knew that every reaction, every single one, starts from zero.
That night, drums thundered from 3 directions at once, and the triangle on the map was symmetrical and predictable. He lay in the shelter and stared into the darkness, while the system methodically recorded each drum's rhythm as a separate data point.
He smiled because they were drumming for themselves and didn't know their rhythm had already become entries in someone else's journal.
He woke before dawn, not because of noise, but because of silence. The drums had stopped, and silence woke him more surely than any sound.
The system showed 5:47 local time, and 3 red markers still glowed on the map, exactly as they had the night before.
The priorities for the second day were simple, and the system had already laid them out in 3 blank lines.
Water, food, a full understanding of the island's perimeter.
He ate 2 unripe fruits from the night before, 180 calories, against a daily requirement of 2,800 for an active man of 74 kilograms.
The deficit was obvious and dangerous, and hunger was a variable that could not be ignored for more than 3 days without losing cognitive function.
He walked north along the stream, because streams flow from high ground, and high ground offers a view of everything. 20 minutes in, the system opened a new entry: basic edible plants.
Unripe bananas, 90 calories each. He took 8 and kept moving.
The climb took 40 minutes, the jungle thinning as the rocks beneath his feet grew sharper and more solid.
The hilltop opened without warning, and the system began scanning the horizon in all directions simultaneously.
The island was smaller than he had expected, 47 square kilometers, calculated in 90 seconds.
The lake where he had fallen lay at the center, and 3 valleys radiated outward from it like spokes, each ending at a different tribe.
The northern valley held gray outcrops of iron ore-bearing rock visible through the canopy.
The eastern valley was flat and green, and the system classified it as high agronomic potential.
The southern valley glistened with freshwater springs, and every drop of it was under someone else's control.
He smiled quietly, because the island had been designed as a challenge, every resource deliberately placed beyond another group's perimeter. The system opened a blank tab and named it Strategy, leaving it empty for him to fill.
The calculation took 4 minutes, and it produced exactly 2 paths.
The first path was force, and force required weapons, allies, and time he didn't have. The second path was value, and value required something the natives didn't have, something only knowledge could provide.
He knew nuclear physics, thermodynamics, material science, medicine, and agronomy at the level needed to be the most dangerous person on the island.
They knew none of this, and that asymmetry was worth more than any spear with a burnt bone tip.
He descended by a different route, the map growing denser with every step. On the way back, he found clay by the stream bank, and the system opened the entry, Basic Ceramics, with a forward arrow.
Clay meant vessels. Vessels meant water storage. Water storage meant independence from controlled sources.
Civilization progress rose to 0.8%, and the chain of technology grew 1 link shorter. He returned to camp and began shaping the first vessel, hands moving slowly, because theory was ahead of practice for now.
Firing took 3 hours at no less than 800 degrees, judged by the visual color of the flame.
The vessel came out crooked and rough, and the system rated its durability as sufficient, the only word needed.
He filled it with water from the stream and set it beside the shelter.
Then he heard the sound of branches cracking, too rhythmic for an animal, too cautious for a passerby.
The system placed a yellow marker 30 meters to the west and classified the source as a lone observer.
He didn't turn his head and kept working with the clay, pretending not to hear, not to know, not to calculate angles of view.
The observer stood motionless for 8 minutes, then left as quietly as he had come.
The system tracked his route northeast, confirmed the location of the first tribe's base, and updated the marker accordingly.
They thought they were studying him, but he had known about the observer 3 minutes before the man had even taken his position.
That night, The map was no longer empty, and an empty map and a full one are not the same world at all. 47 square kilometers, 3 tribes, 3 resources, 1 crooked clay vessel, and civilization at 0.8%.
He smiled into the darkness, because the observer would return, and when he did, there would be something waiting.
The observer returned the next morning, and this time he brought 2 others with him.
3 yellow markers appeared at 7:23, moving slowly and cautiously, the pace of people who haven't made up their minds yet.
He sat by the fire and worked the clay deliberately. The second vessel was already smoother than the first.
He positioned himself in profile to them, so their movement stayed visible at the edge of his eye, without a single turn of his head.
They stopped 25 meters away, and the system confirmed an important detail: no weapons in hand.
No weapons in hand meant neither attack nor hunt, and the only remaining category was reconnaissance with curiosity attached.
He gave them time, 11 minutes, because time in this situation belonged to him, not them.
Then, one of the 3 deliberately snapped a twig underfoot, and that was the signal for contact.
He raised his head slowly and looked directly at them, neither standing up nor backing away, pulse steady.
They were young, and the leader's gaze had already fixed on the clay vessel with unmistakable attention.
He took the vessel, poured water into it from the stream, set it on the ground, and slid it 1/2 meter toward them.
The leader looked at the vessel for 3 seconds, then looked at him, and in that gaze there was no threat, only calculation.
The leader stepped forward, picked up the vessel, examined it from every angle, turned it over, and set it back down. Then he pointed at the vessel, pointed at the man, and spoke a single word in a rising tone.
The system recorded the sound and offered a translation, Karuta, likely meaning creator or master. What followed was 22 minutes of slow, careful exchange. A word in Russian, a word in the tribe's language, one object pointed at a time.
By the end, the system had collected 31 words and classified 8 of them with confidence.
Water, fire, stone, wood, man, many, few, and the sound that marks a question, the building blocks of a language, and the beginning of a deal.
Then the leader reached into the bag at his side and placed a piece of raw iron ore on the ground between them. He stepped back 1 pace, and the system flashed a new entry, raw iron, received via first exchange.
The leader knew the value of what he was carrying, and was waiting to see if the stranger understood it too.
He stood, walked to the shelter, and returned with the second clay vessel he had finished that morning, set it beside the ore, and stepped back.
The leader looked at the vessel, looked at him, and nodded once.
Civilization progress jumped from 0.8 to 1.4% in an instant, and the first trade contact was logged.
They headed northeast, and the leader turned around once as he left. Not a threat, the system noted, but interest.
He sat by the fire holding a piece of iron ore, warm from the sun, and the technology log opened a new chain: smelting, forging, iron tools, in the correct order.
They thought they had traded a stone for a pot, but they didn't know the pot was the ticket to another metal age entirely.
The northeast marker changed color from red to yellow, from threat to contact, and 2 red markers remained.
The iron ore weighed about 2 kilograms, and the system classified it as magnetite, with a 68% iron content.
68% was good. For primitive smelting, it meant pure metal without complex fluxes.
The problem was temperature. Magnetite melts at 1,538 degrees, and a regular fire reaches 600 at best.
Charcoal burns at 1,100 degrees. Better, but still not enough.
Forced draft was needed. Forced draft meant bellows. Bellows meant leather. Leather meant an animal, and he had none of those things yet.
The system laid out the chain of dependencies like an equation, where each term demanded the previous one first.
He started with charcoal, the only element in the chain achievable right here, right now.
He dug the pit with a sharpened stick and a stone, 80 centimeters deep, covered it with turf, and lit the fire at 9:15 in the morning.
The system set a timer for 6 hours, and he moved on to the next priority.
Protein deficiency kills slowly but completely. So 7 loop traps came next, materials gathered from the jungle floor.
At 3:30 in the afternoon, the charcoal pit reached its stage, and he opened the lid to white smoke. The process had run correctly.
The charcoal was black and dense, rated sufficient for intermediate smelting with blast, and the chain to iron grew shorter. He ate a lizard by the fire and worked the bellows problem with what he had, fig tree bark, fibrous and flexible.
The design was rough, resembled true bellows only in concept, but it moved air at 0.3 cubic meters per minute, the bare minimum needed.
The system opened the entry for primitive bellows and moved the pointer one step closer to first iron smelting.
That night, rain fell, short and heavy, and he lay listening to it drum on the palm leaves while thinking about the northern tribe's leader.
The look that man had given the clay vessel wasn't savagery. It was pragmatism.
A pragmatic person can be an ally because interest is the universal language of any era, any people, any island.
The rain stopped at 11:10, and silence returned, and on the map, one marker had shifted from red to yellow. He lit the smelting fire at 6 in the morning. Coal layered, ore centered, bellows started at 6:15.
The system measured temperature by flame color, and by 7:40, it had reached a steady, bright orange, around 900 degrees.
Not enough, but he kept going, and the rhythm of the bellows became mechanical and relentless.
At 8:55, white edges appeared on the flame, and the system estimated 1,100 degrees, the limit of the current setup.
The ore didn't fully melt, but a shiny layer formed on its surface, and the system classified it as bloom, crude but real. An entire technological era lay between iron ore and crude iron, and he had just crossed it with bark and coal and his own 2 hands. He pulled the piece out with wooden tongs, chipped the slag away with a stone, and the system logged iron smelting 1. Status completed. Civilization progress rose to 3.4%, and the piece of hot metal in his grip felt like a formula finally proven. At that moment, the sky above the lake changed, and the system reacted before he could even raise his head. The interface displayed a flashing message: teleportation, subject 2, estimated time, 40 seconds. A glow 3 meters wide formed above the water at the center of the lake. He set down the chisel and ran toward the shore, because a disoriented person in open water after impact doesn't get a second chance. She surfaced on her own, a good sign, and swam toward the shore with movements that were professional and precise. The system generated a preliminary profile in 20 seconds. Subject 2, approximately 26 years old, excellent physical condition, medical bracelet on her left wrist. She stepped out of the water, stopped, and looked at him. And in her eyes, there was no fear. It was the look of someone who had already assessed the situation and reached preliminary conclusions before her feet were dry. She said, in fluent Russian, that her name was Irina, that she was a military surgeon, and that she had no idea where she was. He told her the island was 47 square kilometers, that there were 3 tribes, that the first metal had been obtained, and that she had been expected. She looked at the interface he gestured toward, and her attention shifted to professionally attentive. A military surgeon is more than medicine, and the system confirmed it when it added the tag, combat experience likely. She asked how many medical resources they had, and he told her none, and she nodded exactly like someone who had expected that answer. Then she spotted the chisel by the anvil and asked what it was, and when he explained, her expression changed in a way that meant reassessment, upward. He showed her the camp, the shelter, the stream, the map. She listened without unnecessary questions and remembered everything on the first pass. Then she examined his hands and stated, cleanly and without pause, that he had a 2nd-degree burn on his right palm.
She found the right leaves herself in 8 minutes, and the system recorded basic herbal medicine.
Civilization progress showed 4.1%, the best single-day increase yet, and the day was not over.
They sat by the fire that evening, and she studied the 3 markers on the map and asked which tribe was the most dangerous. He told her he didn't know yet, and that was the only honest answer. She said danger was her specialty, and the system added a new entry to the log: First Ally. Irina woke before him the next morning. The fire was already lit, and 2 new water vessels stood beside it. She had bypassed all 7 traps and reloaded 3 of them correctly, starting at 5:20 in the morning, without being asked.
That kind of initiative says more about a person's character than anything they could put into words.
He looked at the map, 3 markers in their positions, and the northern yellow one was the day's immediate objective. She handed him a banana and said, without preamble, that they needed a medical base before anyone suffered a serious injury. He told her that medical infrastructure was priority 3, after iron tools and permanent shelter, by the logic of survival.
She looked at him with the look of her professional who had already formulated her counter-argument before he finished speaking.
Metalworking always produces burns, cuts, and fractures, she said. Iron tools without surgery are not progress. They are a risk.
He considered that for 8 seconds, and the system silently opened a new line in the priority log and placed them side by side as equals.
She was right, and acknowledging that cost nothing, because being right is data, not territory to defend. They split the tasks without lengthy negotiation. She went into the jungle for medicinal plants, and he went to the forge.
An iron ingot without forging is just a heavy, useless lump, and he set about changing that with 340 hammer blows.
After 340 strikes, the metal began to take shape. The system classified the workpiece as suitable for a primitive knife. The leader of the northern tribe arrived at 9:15, alone and without ore, a new kind of visit entirely. The system changed his marker to green with a question mark, uncertain but potentially positive.
The man stopped by the fire and looked at the metal blank with the recognition of someone who has mined something his whole life but never seen what it can become.
He picked up the blank with tongs and demonstrated the shape of the future knife, running the edge along a stone to show the direction of the work.
The leader watched intently, and the system recorded his micro-expressions. The dominant emotion was desire, clear and unambiguous. He said one word in the tribe's language, vara, meaning many, and pointed to the ore, then to the blank, then back to the leader. The structure of the deal was understood instantly, because trade logic is universal for any sentient being in any era. The leader said his word for agreement and left quickly, the marker moving northeast. Irina returned at 10:40 with an armful of plants, sorting them with the precision of a pharmacist, naming each one and its properties.
Anti-inflammatory, antiseptic, antipyretic, hemostatic. The system opened 4 new entries simultaneously.
Civilization progress jumped to 5.3%, a record, and it wasn't even noon. At 2:30, the leader returned with 2 others, carrying 4 large trunks of ore totaling 8.2 kilograms. He received them with a knife he had managed to finish while they were away, blade rough but genuinely sharp.
The leader took it and ran his finger carefully along the edge, cut himself, and looked at the drop of blood without fear or reaction. Then he raised the knife, looked across at the stranger, and said a single word the system had not yet encountered.
Irina stood nearby and said quietly that regardless of the language, the intonation of that word meant only one thing: respect. They thought they had received a knife. They didn't know the knife was only the first payment in a long-term alliance.
The northern marker on the map turned completely green, the first tribe out of 3 to be won.
That evening, the map showed 1 green, 1 yellow, and 2 red markers, and the balance had started to shift. She asked which tribe came next, and he said the east, because food matters more than water when there is a stream and an ally. The system closed the 6th day at 5.8% civilization progress, 1 alliance confirmed, and everything still ahead. He woke with the plan already formed, because the subconscious works best while the conscious mind is sleeping. The eastern tribe controlled the fertile land, and fertile land meant food, and food meant numbers, and numbers meant strength.
He told Irina he was East alone because first contact with an unknown group is unpredictable.
She told him a military surgeon wasn't a liability on a reconnaissance mission. No plea in her voice, just a statement of fact.
He thought it over for 6 seconds. The system quietly added medical cover during contact to the list of valid arguments. They set out at 6:30 with 2 clay vessels, 1 knife, and a field medical kit made of leaves, fiber, and bark.
The Eastern Valley opened after 40 minutes of walking, flat, wide, green, with cultivated plots visible among the trees.
The system detected contact at 180 meters, and the red marker split into 5 separate dots. 5 people, already watching. The valley was open, and a stealthy approach was a physical impossibility. He stopped, set both vessels on the ground in front of him, and stepped back. Irina did the same beside him without a word. Demonstrating a lack of threat is a universal language that works before any words have been spoken. The 5 stood motionless for 2 minutes, and then one broke from the group and walked toward them, stride confident and quick. He was older than Taro, broader in the shoulders, with the kind of face a man builds only by making decisions every day. The system tagged him probable leader, Eastern tribe, moderate physical threat.
He stopped 3 meters away and appraised them, the vessels, the knife, Irina, with a gaze that was cold and measuring.
He said something in a different language, and the system opened a second empty dictionary and began recording from 0. He poured water into a vessel from the flask he carried and held it out, slowly, palm open. The leader didn't take it and didn't step back. He simply looked, turning the silence into a test of patience. The test lasted 40 seconds. He passed it without moving. The leader then took the vessel, examined it, set it down, and spoke to his 4 companions, who approached. After 12 minutes of exchange, the system had 18 words confirmed: food, many, stranger, and that last one was used for both of them constantly. Irina said quietly that one of the 5 was holding his right hand at an angle consistent with an unhealed radio fracture. He looked. She was right. And a broken arm, at this moment, was worth more than any clay vessel he was carrying. He pointed to the young warrior's arm, pointed to Irina, then gestured the alignment and immobilization of a fracture with his hands. The leader's expression changed. Something appeared that the system classified as interest. Irina approached the warrior, who tensed immediately. Then the leader spoke a single word, and the warrior held still. She worked quickly, located the break, improvised a splint, and had it set in 8 minutes flat. The warrior wiggled his fingers, looked at his hand, then looked at Irina with an expression known only to people who have just been relieved of pain. The leader watched it all in silence, then said a single word, and the system recorded its highest probability tag: possible invitation. They thought the strangers had come to trade ceramics. They didn't know they had brought something the tribe had never possessed. They followed the leader deeper into the valley, the system marking every step of the route. Through the trees ahead, the first structures of the eastern village came into view. The village was larger than expected: 34 structures, a population of approximately 80, and the smell of smoke mixed with fermented grain. The system identified that second scent immediately: primitive beer, which meant a grain surplus, which meant agronomy beyond simple gathering. The Eastern tribe's rating updated: basic agronomy revised to advanced agronomy, ? Attached. Irina walked beside him, and he knew, without any signal between them, that she was assessing every person they passed for threats. 2 warriors by the farthest building watched with open hostility. The system marked them red without comment. The leader stopped at the largest building in the center and gestured them inside. The system tagged it Tribal Status Site. Inside, cool and dark, 4 elders sat on woven mats. The system estimated their ages at 40 and above. This was a council, and a council meant the leader was the executor, and these 4 were the decision makers. He sat down without being invited.
because a person standing during negotiations is either a guest or a supplicant, and neither role suited him.
Irina sat beside him, back straight, and 2 of the 4 elders looked at her with immediate interest.
The eldest began to speak, and by the 10th minute, the system had accumulated 42 words. The meaning assembled itself from context and gesture, and it came down to 3 questions universal to any first contact in human history. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you want?
He knew the answers to all 3, but the order of presentation was more important than the content.
He placed the second clay vessel before the council, then laid the knife beside it, handle facing them.
A knife offered handle first to a stranger is a gesture that needs no translation because it runs deeper than language.
Each of the 4 elders held the knife in turn, examined it in silence, and passed it on with thoughts he couldn't read.
Then Irina stood quietly and left, and he knew exactly where she was going, and it was the right move made entirely without his instruction.
She returned 14 minutes later with 2 injured men she had located during her own survey of the village. She began working right there in the ceremonial area, and the elders watched with expressions that shifted slowly but unmistakably. A dislocated shoulder reset in 40 seconds. The warrior cried out, then moved his arm and stared at her like she was a natural phenomenon.
An infected wound cleaned with antiseptic decoction, bandaged with clean fiber, precise and without waste.
The system recorded medicine, surgery, demonstration, and civilization progress climbed to 7.2% in real time.
The eldest spoke a single word. All 4 looked toward him, and the system tagged it. Possible trade.
He nodded and held up 3 fingers, which signified the 3 things he wanted. First finger, grain, and he mimed the act of sowing.
Second finger.
Third finger, access to their fields for instruction. The leader and elders exchanged brief words, and the system picked up one that it tagged as knowledge or skill, kano. They understood that knowledge was being offered in exchange for resources, and this formula was familiar to them, even though no one had put it into words before. At 2:47 in the afternoon, the sky above the village changed, and the system was first to react.
New window on the interface. Teleportation. Subject 3. Estimated time 25 seconds.
He stood and walked quickly toward the exit. Irina understood without a word. A glow appeared over the field 100 meters from the village, and a figure fell from it, straight onto the plowed earth, with a dull thud. He reached her in 20 seconds. She was on her side, already scanning her surroundings with professional speed.
The system finished her profile, and the last line appeared, and he smiled quietly, because this was not a coincidence.
Subject 3. Malika, age 23. Specialization, agronomist. Work experience, arid zones of Central Asia. Object in hands, seed bank.
She had fallen directly into the fields of the eastern tribe, clutching seeds in her hands, while the village elders watched in complete silence from the edge. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her clothes, looked at everything around her, the island, the village, the fields, and said one word in Russian. She said good, and in that single word was everything needed to understand who she was. Civilization progress showed 8.1%, and the system opened a new entry. Subject 3 integrated, eastern marker shifting to yellow. Malika looked at the fields and spoke as a professional. Volcanic soil, pH of approximately 6.2, ideal for grain cultivation. The system opened a primary soil analysis record, and an agronomic journal appeared as a separate tab in the interface.
He briefed her in 4 minutes. She asked one question: how long until the next rainy season?
The system answered through cloud analysis 18 to 22 days, which was short. The rectangular container in her hands held 23 types of seeds: wheat, rye, corn, 3 varieties of legumes, root vegetables, and greens. The system logged each section separately and flagged the contents with one tag: professional selection, not a random assortment. The elders were still watching from the village edge, and their attention had shifted completely from him to Malika. She walked to the field, crouched, picked up a handful of soil, rubbed it between her fingers, and smelled it. That was a language even the eldest elder understood. He stepped forward and stopped, and Malika raised her head. She held out the handful of earth to him, and he took it, rubbed it between his fingers, and nodded once. The system recorded this exchange as the establishment of professional contact, and that was more accurate than any diplomatic term could be.
Arena leaned close and whispered that Malika had just done in 5 minutes what they hadn't managed in an hour of negotiation.
She was right, and the truth needs no comment when the result is visible to the naked eye. Malika began teaching with her hands. Seeds shown, planting depth demonstrated, spacing adjusted, and the village drew slowly toward her. 40 minutes later, 8 tribe members were working in the field beside her, and she moved among them, correcting depth and spacing without pause. The agronomic journal filled line by line. The system noted, food supply beginning. That evening, he returned to the council and requested another audience. The eldest received him after a 7-minute wait. He proposed 3 things: Arena's medical visits twice a week, Malika's agronomic guidance through the planting season with a guaranteed 40% yield increase, and iron tools for tilling the land within 14 days. The elder listened without changing expression, the sign of a man who can think without showing his thinking. Then, the elder asked one question, and the system translated it with confidence. What do you want in return? He answered with a single word from their language, Kano, meaning knowledge, meaning alliance. The elder stood and left without a word, and he waited in silence while Malika's voice carried in from the field outside. 22 minutes later, the elder returned, sat down, and said a word the system translated at 94% confidence. The word meant yes, and it was the second green marker on the map, and the system recorded it without ceremony. Civilization progress showed 9.7%, and the technology log opened a new chain, systemic agriculture. The 3 of them walked back to camp in the evening, an empty container, a field medical kit, and a head full of data between them. Malika said that without a guaranteed water supply, agronomy was a gamble, and the system agreed. The southern red marker automatically became priority 1. 2 out of 3 markers were green, and all that remained for the third was the right key, and they had 22 days to find it. He spent 3 days studying the southern tribe, and the system built a preliminary profile from circumstantial data. They had no trade contact with the east and no contact with the north. Isolation by choice, not circumstance. Isolation by choice means one of 2 things: fear or self-sufficiency, and each requires a completely different approach. The system ran its analysis at 71% confidence and returned a single result: self-sufficiency combined with aggression. They controlled the freshwater springs, and water is an absolute resource, and absolute resources produce absolute certainty in one's own power. Then Arena reported fresh tracks near the southern border of the camp, at least 5 pairs, and they had appeared every day for 4 days running. The southern tribe had been watching them. That meant the period of passive observation was ending. Malika returned from the eastern fields that evening with information that changed everything about how the situation should be read. The eastern elder had passed her the name of the southern tribe, the Vero, roughly 120 people, led by a chief named Dakar. Dakar maintained power through 2 things: fear and control of the only freshwater springs on the island. Anyone who didn't pay tribute to Dakar received no water, and the eastern tribe paid in grain, while the northern tribe paid in ore, every month. He smiled quietly, because this explained why both allied tribes lived below their potential and endured it as something inevitable. The system opened a new file and named it Political Map of the Island, and the map was significantly more complex than its surface suggested. Arena asked him directly what he planned to do about Dakar, and the question was not small talk. She wanted a real strategic answer. He told her that diplomacy with a man who holds power through fear is negotiation on his terms, by his rules. Dakar would not understand value and would not accept an exchange. His system was not built on value, but on force. Malika was quiet for a moment, then said she had drought-resistant seeds in the container for exactly situations like this.
He understood her meaning, and the system confirmed it and opened a new strategic log entry. If the eastern and northern tribes achieved water independence, Dakar's monopoly would collapse without a single spear thrown.
Rainwater collection, underground sources, condensation traps. This was an engineering problem solvable in 2 weeks. But 2 weeks meant 2 weeks of exposure, and Dakar was running reconnaissance, and by all evidence, he was not a patient man.
The system calculated the probability of a preemptive strike within 7 days and returned 68%.
On the 7th day after that calculation, the southern marker split into many moving dots, heading north fast. The system sounded the alarm at 5:50 in the morning. About 30 figures moving in 3 groups, the middle one heading straight for camp without any attempt at concealment.
This was not a reconnaissance, and the system confirmed it in a red box. Attack, 96% certainty. He woke Irina with a single word, and she was upright in an instant, medical kit in hand, her face as calm as an operating room.
Malika was sleeping in the eastern field, out of the immediate line of fire, and that was good.
3 iron knives and 1 sharpened rod. That was the full inventory of offensive capability.
The system ran position calculations in 8 seconds and offered 3 options. He chose the second because it used the terrain. A stream, dense trees, and a path through the thicket that forced movement single file, and that changed the math.
He took position at the bend in the path. Irina positioned herself behind a tree 20 meters back with a sharpened stake. The first Varo warrior appeared on the path at 6:12, large, spear in hand, stride confident, expecting no resistance. They thought they were approaching a lone stranger without a tribe or weapons, and that confidence was their greatest weakness in that moment.
He smiled, because 30 against 2 is bad math, only if you don't control the geometry. The warrior entered the bend, saw him, stopped, and at that exact moment, a horn sounded from behind the Varo group. The system identified the signal and found its source. The northern green marker was moving, and moving fast. Taro was coming from the east with 12 warriors, spears in hand, pace swift and deliberate. The alliance was working, and the system recorded it. Civilization progress jumped to 11.2% the moment the ally appeared on the field.
The Varo warrior looked at him, then glanced back at the horn, and in his eyes there was a split second of hesitation.
He stepped forward, voice steady and cold, and said one word in the Varo's own language. The system had sourced it from the Eastern Tribes Dictionary, close enough en route.
The word meant go away.
He left, and they all left, and the system tracked them by marker all the way to the southern border. Dakar had received only information today that the lone stranger was no longer alone and never would be.
But the system estimated the probability of a second attack within 10 days at 89%, and that was not a victory.
A reprieve and a victory are not the same thing, and the distance between them is precisely what separates a strategist from a man who merely survived. He gathered everyone at camp at 7:30, the first general meeting, and the system opened a new tab, War Journal.
Irina sat upright. Malika held her empty container on her lap, and Taro stood by a tree and listened, his name confirmed with 100% certainty after 10 days of indirect references.
Taro had come without an invitation, which meant the alliance wasn't obligation, it was choice, and that distinction mattered. He explained the situation with gestures, familiar words, and the combined translation of Irina and Malika. Dakar controlled the water. Water was the choke point. As long as he held it, they were building on someone else's foundation. Taro listened, and when he finished, said one word: war. Steady and resolute, with no hesitation behind it. He told Taro that war was the last resort, and that before war, there was something that shifts the balance without a single life lost. Taro looked at him with the expression he had already learned to read, listening, but not yet convinced. He went to the forge,
The word forge was still generous for a stone, a cold pit, and bark bellows, but the system had already calculated the upgrades.
Step 1. A stone casting mold. Step 2. Bellows made of animal hide instead of bark.
Taro watched in silence, and 20 minutes later did something unprompted, took the leather bag from his shoulder and held it out.
Tanned, thick, and exactly what was needed.
The new leather bellows produced 0.8 cubic meters per minute against the old 0.3, and that raised the smelting temperature by 200 degrees. The system recorded improved bellows, and the civilization progress indicator showed 12.1%, and the forge finally became a real forge.
Arena was building a stationary medical post nearby, poles and broadleaves, methodical and focused.
She said without looking up that if there was going to be a real battle, she needed clean water, fire, and a place for the wounded to lie down.
He told her she would have all three, and she nodded and kept working.
Malika returned from the eastern fields at noon with news that accelerated every timeline on the board. Dakar had sent a messenger to the eastern elders demanding that the grain tribute be doubled immediately. A demand to double tribute is not economic. The system tagged it at once. Provocation.
If the Easterners paid, it meant the alliance had been hollow from the start. Dakar was testing them.
He asked Malika to return to the elders with a single message, which she wrote on bark.
The message said, "In 7 days, the Eastern tribe would have its own water, and tribute to Dakar would be history."
7 days was honest and tight. The system confirmed it, and it demanded non-stop work on every front simultaneously. Condensation traps from fig leaves, clay reservoirs for rainwater, and a search for the underground water table. The underground search carried no guarantees. The system rated success at 55%, which was too low to be comfortable.
But 55% isn't zero, and a physicist who refuses an experiment with a 55% success rate is not a physicist. He is an accountant.
By evening, 4 iron spearheads were finished, rough but iron, and that was what counted. Taro fitted one to his spear and struck a rock with it. The sound was different from bone. He looked across at the stranger and understood that the balance of power had shifted. The system recorded Allies' weaponry. First entry, Northern Tribe combat capability increased. That night, the map showed 1 green marker, 1 yellow, and 1 red, and time contracted like plasma in a reactor. Dakar had no idea that in 7 days, a physicist with a system would turn a coal pit into the beginning of an arms industry. Every bit of pressure Dakar applied was only accelerating what he was trying to stop. The underground water started at 5:30 in the morning because the system offered no other options.
Volcanic island geology meant water had to exist somewhere. The only questions were depth and entry point.
Malika arrived from the eastern fields at 6 with local intelligence that changed the search location entirely. An elder had shown her a place where the grass stayed green even through the dry season, a surface marker for water below.
The system recalculated at once, probability of success rising from 55 to 78%.
The spot was 400 meters to the southeast, and the grass there was darker and more vibrant, exactly as described. They dug with an iron rod, and Taro sent warriors without being asked. They worked silently and without wasted motion. At 1.4 meters, the soil turned wet. At 1.9 meters, water came up from below. Clear and cold, the system ran its analysis in 8 seconds. Mineral composition suitable for drinking, bacterial contamination minimal. A water source completely independent of Dakar.
Malika stood at the edge of the well and looked down, and the satisfaction on her face was the kind known only to people who work with the earth and receive an answer back.
Civilization progress jumped to 13.8%, and a waterlog appeared as a new tab. He sent one of Taro's warriors to the Eastern Elders with a single word on bark: Kano.
In context, it meant the promise had been fulfilled, and tribute to Dakar was no longer required.
The eldest elder came himself, 40 minutes later, accompanied by 3 others, and among them was Dakar's messenger, still waiting for his answer.
The elder approached the well dipped his hand, raised his wet palm, and looked at it for a long time in complete silence.
Then he turned to the messenger and said something brief. The system caught one word. It meant no.
The messenger looked at the well, the elder, and then at him, and the system recorded his micro-expressions clearly.
The dominant emotion was fear, and it was the right kind. He understood what Dakar would bring now, and what Dakar would do with what he was carrying back.
The messenger left quickly. The system tracked him south. The war journal added one line: escalation is inevitable.
Arena came to him after the others dispersed and said quietly that they needed to prepare for a real battle.
He told her he knew, and the system was already calculating defensive positions around the camp, the well, and the eastern village.
The island's terrain offered 3 natural positions. The first was the bend in the trail, already tested in the first skirmish.
The second was the eastern slope of the hill, where dense trees provided both cover and a clear line of sight.
The third was the well itself, because whoever controls the water controls the tempo of any confrontation on this island.
Taro arrived that evening with not 12 but 18 warriors, 6 of them carrying iron spearheads.
The system recorded the coalition's combat capability, and for the first time the word coalition appeared in the war journal, where ally had stood before.
Malika sat by the fire, sketching an irrigation plan from the well to the fields. 3 days of work, she said, without looking up.
She added that if Dakar attacked the fields, the harvest would be lost, and that would be worse than any military loss in the long run.
He told her the fields would be protected, and at that exact moment, the system generated a new alert on the interface.
Teleportation. Subject 4. Estimated time 15 seconds.
A glow appeared over the hill, and a figure fell into the thicket on the slope.
He reached the spot in 30 seconds. She was already sitting upright, assessing the surroundings with a sharp and immediate gaze.
The system ran her profile, and the last line stopped him for a full second.
Subject 4. Sora, age 24. Specialization, military engineer. Experience, fortification and siege structures.
She stood up, brushed off the leaves, and spoke first, in Russian, and directly.
She said she had seen 3 columns of smoke from the air, assessed the island's terrain on the way down, and already had 3 questions about the defense perimeter.
They thought the next 10 days would be a period of weakness. They didn't know the system had just closed the final gap.
He smiled because Dakar was preparing an attack, and his opponent had just acquired a military engineer the day before the war.
Civilization progress showed 15.2%, and the war log opened a new entry: defense preparation active.
Sora walked the perimeter in the first hour after her arrival, and what she produced was not an observation, it was a blueprint. She identified 3 critical weaknesses in the camp's positioning and proposed fixes for each before she had been given a full briefing.
He watched her work and noted what he noted in everyone, the system selected: the capacity to act before the situation requires it.
She asked about available materials: iron, wood, stone, clay, fiber, and the system provided the inventory.
Her response was immediate. She could build a perimeter barrier, a raised observation post, and reinforced entry points in 6 days using those materials.
6 days. Dakar's timeline, based on the messenger's return and his pattern of movement, was estimated at 4 to 7 days.
It was tight. The system confirmed it without softening. 73% probability of attack before fortification was complete.
He gathered everyone at dawn: Arena, Malika, Taro, Sora, and the system recorded the meeting as the first full coalition council.
5 people from different disciplines, different languages, and different skill sets, and the overlap between them was the island itself.
Sora laid out the defensive plan on the ground with a stick: positions, fallback routes, material requirements, labor assignments.
She didn't ask for permission. She presented, and the others listened, and the plan was clear.
Taro's warriors began construction that same morning, and Sora moved among them, correcting technique with the same precision Arena used on a fracture.
The barrier posts went into the ground in the eastern approach first, because that was the most probable axis of attack.
Arena set up the medical station at the second defensive position, clean water line, fire position, and flat ground for the wounded.
Malika organized the field workers into two groups, one continuing the irrigation channel, one ready to evacuate the seed stock at first signal. The system tracked all 4 threads simultaneously, and the civilization progress indicator climbed steadily. 16.1, 16.8, 17.3. Each percent was a barrier post planted, a water channel extended, a wound dressed. Progress measured in real material against real time.
On the 3rd day of construction, a Varro scout was spotted on the southern hill. The system detected him at 200 meters.
He was watching the construction. He was counting the workers. He was sending information back. The system noted, reconnaissance active, estimated time to escalation revised to 48 to 72 hours.
He told Sora, and she absorbed it without changing pace, and quietly accelerated the eastern barrier by half a day.
Taro came to him that evening, and they sat at the fire together, and the conversation was conducted in fragments, pieces of 3 languages and the gestures that bridged them.
Taro asked, in the way that required no translation, whether the stranger was afraid.
He thought about it honestly and said no, because fear and caution are not the same variable, and only one of them is useful.
Taro looked at him for a moment and then nodded slowly, which the system classified as approval. At 2:17 on the 5th morning, the southern marker on the map began to move.
Not the scattered scouting dots of before, a single mass, moving with discipline and speed.
The system counted the markers, 43, moving in 2 columns, taking the eastern approach, exactly as predicted.
He was on his feet and at the signal horn in 11 seconds.
Taro heard the signal and had his warriors in position before the sound had finished echoing through the jungle. Sora went directly to the observation post. The system tracked her there and marked her position green.
Arena moved without instruction to the medical station. Water already heated, materials laid out, everything in sequence.
Malika secured the seed container and moved it 40 meters back behind the second fallback position. 43 warriors against 23, but 23 behind a barrier, on known ground, with iron-tipped spears.
The number still favored Dakar, and the system didn't soften that fact. Sora's voice came from the observation post at a steady volume. Position reports, timing of approach, column spacing.
Real-time intelligence from elevated ground changed the calculation considerably. The Varro reached the outer perimeter at 6:41, and the barrier forced them to compress into the narrow eastern approach.
Sora had designed that compression deliberately, and the system confirmed it had worked exactly as intended.
The first exchange of spears was brief and loud, and the barrier held, and Taro's warriors pushed forward without being commanded to.
An iron spearhead against bone and wood is a different kind of weapon, and the Varro felt that difference immediately.
3 Varro warriors pulled back. 2 more took their place and hesitated. The system tracked the hesitation. It was spreading. He moved to the center position and raised his voice in the direction of the Varro line, using the only word he had for their leader.
He said Dakar's name, once, clearly, and loud enough to carry.
The movement in the Varro line stopped.
He stepped forward 1 pace from behind the barrier and held the iron knife outward, handle first, exactly as he had done in the Council of Elders.
The gesture carried across the distance because it is a language older than any spoken word.
A man at the front of the Varro column, broader than the others, carrying a carved bone staff, took a step forward.
Dakar.
The system confirmed the identification by cross-referencing body proportions against the scout data from the previous week.
They looked at each other across 30 meters and the barrier between them.
He said in slow, deliberate fragments, combining what the system had in the Varro language from the Eastern Tribes Dictionary, that water did not belong to Dakar.
That water belonged to the earth, and the earth responded to those who worked it.
He pointed to the well, to the fields, to the barrier made of iron and wood, and the work of 4 people and 20 warriors. Dakar stood in silence for 11 seconds, and the system recorded every second of it.
Then Dakar said something, and the system caught 3 words: stranger, many, and the word for power.
He answered with 2 words, Kano, and the word the system had recorded from Taro's first visit, the word for alliance.
23 on one side, 43 on the other, and between them, the well, the iron, and the silence of a man deciding whether his world had changed.
Dakar looked at the iron spearheads in Taro's warriors' hands for a long time.
Then he looked at Arena standing at the medical post, at Malika standing behind the fallback line, at Sora on the observation post above.
The system recorded his gaze path as assessment, not aggression, and that was a different thing entirely.
Dakar spoke again, longer this time, and the system pulled 17 words and classified 6 of them.
The 6th word, repeated twice, was the one that mattered. It meant to see or to show. He understood, and the system confirmed the interpretation.
Dakar wanted to see the well.
He said the word Kano again, knowledge, and stepped back from the barrier and gestured for Dakar to approach.
Arena went still behind him. Taro held his position without being told. Dakar walked forward alone, staff in hand, and the Varro line stayed back. He led Dakar to the well without a word, and Dakar looked down into it, and for a long time said nothing.
Then he crouched, reached down, and pulled his hand back up, wet.
He looked at his wet palm for several seconds, and the system recorded the expression and classified it as comprehension.
He had understood, not defeat, comprehension, which is a different and more permanent thing.
Dakar spoke, and the system caught enough: water, and many, and under, and always.
He nodded, because the meaning was clear. This water had always been there, below the grass that stayed green, and no one had looked for it.
Dakar stood, looked at him for a long moment, and set the bone staff on the ground between them.
The system recorded the gesture, unconditional offer, not surrender, but negotiation. He placed the iron knife beside it, handle facing Dakar.
Dakar picked it up, ran his thumb along the blade, and drew a thin line of blood, same as Taro had done. And he understood that this was not fear, but proof.
Proof that iron keeps its edge, and so do the people who carry it.
The Varro warriors behind Dakar had not moved. Taro's warriors had not moved. And in that stillness, something changed on the island that could not be changed back.
Dakar spoke to his warriors, and they lowered their spears, not to the ground, but angled down, which the system classified as stand down.
The 3rd red marker on the map changed color for the first time, from red to yellow, same as the northern tribe on the 9th day.
The system recorded the event without drama. Southern tribe, status, changed to contact.
He turned away from the well and walked back toward the others, because the work of this moment was done, and what came next was the slower work of building.
Sora came down from the observation post, and her assessment was brief and direct. The barrier held, the position worked, and the eastern approach needed one more reinforcement layer regardless.
Arena moved through Taro's warriors, checking for injuries, 2 minor cuts, both addressed in minutes.
Malika stood at the edge of the field with her hands on her container and asked if the irrigation channel could continue now.
He told her yes, and she went immediately. Civilization progress showed 21.4%, and every tab in the system had entries in it now: technology, medicine, agriculture, water, war, coalition.
That evening, 6 people sat around the fire: himself, Arena, Malika, Sora, Taro, and Dakar. 3 languages, 4 skill sets, and 1 island, with 22 days remaining until the first resupply.
Dakar looked at the interface when he gestured toward the system, and the curiosity in his face was the same as every person the system had selected.
Pragmatic, assessing, looking for the structure of the thing.
He showed Dakar the map, the 3 markers, now all shifted toward yellow and green, and pointed to the southern springs.
He said the word Kano, and pointed to the springs, and to the well, and to the fields, and to the forge, tracing the logic of what had been built. Dakar was quiet for a long time, watching the fire, and then said something the system had not heard before. The system recorded it and worked the translation slowly. The word was approximate, but it meant more than one house, or many roofs. He understood what Dakar was saying before the system finished. The same thing, in the same language, that every pragmatic person arrives at when the evidence is in front of them.
One tribe is exposed. Many tribes together are something else.
He nodded once. Dakar nodded once. And the system logged, Southern Tribe, status revised to alliance, pending confirmation. The days that followed were the most productive since his arrival on the island, because the coalition was now complete in principle and needed only execution. Dakar's people knew the Southern Springs in detail, the flow rates, the seasonal variation, the pressure points. Malika spent 2 days in the south with 2 Varo elders, mapping a second irrigation network, and returned with data that extended the agronomic plan by a full growing season. Sora divided the construction work between the 3 tribes, and the result was output she said she had not expected from a team assembled in days. Arena opened a joint medical session in the Eastern Village and treated Varo and Eastern Tribe members in the same space, and the system noted, first multi-tribe medical contact.
Taro's warriors and the Varo warriors ran joint perimeter sweeps without instruction. The system tracked them and noted, Coalition Patrol, first autonomous occurrence.
He stood back and watched it work, because the system's job was to initiate, and a structure that runs without being pushed is the only kind that survives. Civilization progress climbed through 25, then 28, then 31% over 4 days.
On the 31st day, the system generated a new alert, not a teleportation, not a threat, but a resupply drop at the lake center. A crate surfaced from the water, sealed and marked with the same interface symbols as the teleportation windows. He swam out and brought it back, and the 4 of them, the team the system had assembled, opened it together. Medical supplies, seed varieties, metal stock, engineering tools, and a single printed document in Russian. The document said, Phase 1 complete. Civilization progress above 30%. Phase 2 parameters to follow. He read it twice, then set it down, and Arena asked what it said.
He told her, and the 4 of them were quiet for a moment.
Sora asked what Phase 2 was, and he told her honestly that he didn't know yet. Malika looked at the seed varieties in the crate, and her expression was the one she wore when she picked up the island's soil for the first time. Professional satisfaction, focused forward.
Arena began cataloging the medical supplies immediately, which was the correct response.
He picked up the document again and looked at the phrase, Phase 2 parameters to follow, and the system had nothing yet to display. The window was blank and waiting.
The system never does anything by chance. It selects location precisely, and it selects timing precisely.
The blank window meant the parameters depended on what was built here, and what was built here was a coalition of 3 tribes, a forge, a well, irrigated fields, and 4 people who had arrived with nothing. He set the document down on the crate and looked at the island. The smoke from 3 fires, now lit in the same positions they had been on the first day, but belonging to different people now.
Taro came to the camp that afternoon and brought 2 northern warriors carrying a new batch of ore, the largest yet, nearly 20 kilograms.
He set it down by the forge without ceremony and looked at Sora's construction work for a long time before speaking. He said something brief, and the system translated it with 91% confidence. He said it was good.
Dakar arrived an hour later with 2 of his own people, and they were carrying something unexpected. Clay vessels, shaped and fired, produced by Varo hands, using techniques that had traveled south from the first exchange.
The vessels were rough but functional, and the system tagged the entry. Technology transfer confirmed. Northern to Southern Tribe, via Central Node. Central Node. He read the tag and understood what the system was recording. He was not a member of any tribe on this island. He was the point through which the knowledge moved. And a node that transfers knowledge in every direction is not a leader. It is something more durable than that.
Arena came to sit beside him at the fire that evening, and for a while they said nothing.
Then she asked if he thought the system had planned all of it from the beginning. The 4 of them, the 3 tribes, the timing of Malika's arrival in the fields.
He said he didn't know, and that was the honest answer.
She said that either way, the result was the same, and he agreed.
The result was the same regardless of whether it was planned or built, and built things have roots that planned things don't always carry.
Malika's irrigation channel reached the northern fields on the 34th day, and the water ran into the new channels, slowly at first, then steadily.
Taro stood at the channel's end and watched the water come, and his expression was one the system had no category for.
Malika stood beside him, and she didn't explain anything. The water explained itself.
Sora finished the last reinforcement layer on the eastern barrier on the 35th day and ran a test pressure against it with 6 warriors pushing from the outside.
It held without movement. She walked the length of it once and said, "Sufficient."
The word the system had used for the first clay vessel on the first day of the island, before any of this existed.
He heard her say it and smiled quietly, because sufficient is the beginning of everything and the end of nothing.
The Phase 2 window in the system interface remained blank, but the civilization progress indicator had crossed 40%.
And at 40%, a new tab opened in the system that had not been there before.
The tab was labeled Expansion Parameters. He opened it, and the system displayed a map that was larger than the island, the ocean around it, marked with distance indicators pointing outward in 4 directions.
He stared at it for a long time.
Then he called everyone together, all 4 of them, and showed them the map without comment.
Sora studied it for 20 seconds and asked one question. How far?
The system displayed the nearest distance marker, 62 kilometers to the northeast.
Arena looked at him and said, "We'd need a boat."
Malika looked at the expanded map and said, "We'd need to know what's out there first."
He looked at the 3 of them, then at the system's expansion map, then at the island behind him where 3 tribes were building something that hadn't existed 35 days ago.
He said, "We have time." And the system logged the phrase as the first entry in the Expansion Parameters tab.
Taro found him by the forge the next morning before anyone else was awake, which was unusual enough to record.
He sat down across the fire without speaking and looked at the coals for a while, and the system noted the marker as stationary. Northern Tribe Leader, Camp, pre-dawn.
Then Taro said something long and slow, and the system worked through it carefully.
The translation came piece by piece. The word for north, the word for beyond, the word for water, the word for the man with the iron and the map.
Taro already knew about the expansion map. Someone had told him, or he had read it from the faces of the 4 of them when they stood looking at the interface together.
He looked at Taro across the fire and said, "Yes," and pointed northeast.
Taro looked in that direction for a moment, then looked back and said the word the system knew, agreement.
The system added a new line to the coalition log. Northern Tribe, expansion intent confirmed. Dakar came that afternoon with a different kind of news. One of his scouts had returned from the southern edge of the island, reporting a debris field in the water. Not natural debris, shaped wood, rope, the remnants of a vessel.
The system opened the Expansion Parameters tab and placed a new marker on the ocean map, Unknown Contact, South, Estimated Distance Unknown.
He looked at the marker and looked at the 4 of them, and looked at the island that was no longer empty or silent or belonging to anyone alone.
The system did not explain the debris. It recorded it and waited.
The island had been a problem presented as a set of resources and obstacles, and the solution had required exactly what the system had assembled, 4 people who could not have solved it individually.
He understood that clearly now, sitting beside a forge on the 36th day, with 41% civilization progress and a map that was bigger than the island.
The system had not sent him an assistant. It had not sent him a team.
It had sent him the pieces of something and given him the space to build it into a whole.
Irina passed behind him carrying water to the medical station, and she said without slowing down that the Phase 2 window had updated.
He turned to the interface. The blank window now displayed 3 words. The words were, "Find the others." He read the words twice, then set the interface down in his mind like a tool set on a table, useful and ready. Find the others. 3 words, and the system had never needed more than that to define what came next. The debris field in the south was not wreckage, it was a direction, and direction on an open ocean is not mystery, it is work.
He gathered everyone for the last time that evening in the full council. Himself, Irina, Malika, Sora, Taro, and Dakar.
6 people, 3 languages, 3 tribes, 36 days, and 41% of something that had not existed when he fell from a white flash into a lake. He showed them the Phase 2 message and let Irina translate it into the pieces of the island's languages that the council could follow.
Taro responded first. The word for yes, and the word for many, and the word for north, pointed at the expansion map.
Dakar said something longer, and the system translated it slowly. There are always others beyond the water, and those who cross it are either strong or desperate.
He didn't know which they were yet, but the system had not selected him for patience, and the ocean marker was already placed.
Irina said she needed 2 more weeks to build up the medical supply stock before any long voyage would be responsible.
Malika said she needed 1 more planting cycle confirmed before she would be comfortable leaving the fields with the Eastern tribe alone.
Sora said she needed to teach 3 more people to maintain the barrier and the observation post before she would consider the perimeter secure.
He listened to all 3 of them, and the system recorded each condition as a concrete timeline.
2 weeks for medicine. 1 planting cycle for agriculture. 3 trainees for fortification.
The system calculated the overlapping window, 21 to 24 days, and logged it as departure parameters, Phase 2.
Taro spoke again before the council ended, and this time the system had enough vocabulary to translate the full meaning.
He said that the island had been built in 36 days, and that what was built in 36 days could be rebuilt in less.
He said that the tree doesn't stop growing because the wind has changed direction.
The system tagged a phrase as notable, and the record showed it was the first proverb from the island's coalition, spoken by the first ally.
He thought about that, after the council dispersed, that the island had produced not just a coalition, but a language for it, and language is the infrastructure of civilization.
He went to the forge after everyone had gone, because there were 3 more spearheads to finish and the metal was already heated.
The forge glowed orange in the dark, and the bellows moved in the rhythm he had found weeks ago when the bark device could barely move enough air to matter.
The system displayed the forge's current output temperature, 1,240 degrees, nearly double the first day.
He worked until the spearheads were done, and the system logged them, and the technology log added 1 more entry to a chain that had started with a fire made from silicon stones.
Silicon stone fire, clay vessel, charcoal pit, iron smelting, iron forging, iron tools, iron weapons, iron expansion. Every entry a consequence of the one before it, and every entry started from 0.
He set the finished spearheads on the stone beside the forge and looked at the map 1 more time.
The 3 island markers glowed green in the interface, north, east, south, and the ocean map beyond them was dark, except for the new debris marker and the distance line pointing northeast.
62 kilometers, across open water, in a vessel that had not been built yet.
He thought about the reactor in Novosibirsk, and the white flash, and the blue sky, and the 3 seconds of darkness in the water, and none of it seemed unconnected anymore.
The system had not explained itself, and likely never would, and that was fine, because the work was real, and the result was real, and both of those things mattered more than the explanation. A physicist learns early that the universe does not offer reasons, it offers data, and data is enough for a person who knows what to do with it. He was 20 years old and had been dead in Novosibirsk, and was alive on an island with a forge and a coalition and a direction.
3 facts, no contradiction, and 21 days until the system's next phase could begin. That was enough to work with. It always had been.
He covered the forge coals and walked back toward the camp, and the jungle was dark on both sides of the path, and the system's map was full of green and yellow light.
Irina was still awake, sitting by the fire, and she handed him water without looking up from the plant she was pressing between 2 flat stones.
He sat down across from her, and they were quiet for a while, in the way of people who have run out of unnecessary words.
Then she said, "Do you think we'll find them?"
He said, "Yes."
She asked, "How do you know?" He thought about the first clay vessel, and the first exchange, and the first alliance, and the second, and the third. He thought about the agronomist who fell into a field holding seeds, and the surgeon who treated a fracture in a stranger's ceremonial hall. He thought about the engineer who appeared the night before a battle and already had 3 questions about the defense perimeter.
Then he said, because the system doesn't select for the wrong people.
Irina looked up from the plant and smiled, which was unusual enough that the system, if it tracked such things, would have logged it.
The fire burned low between them, and the 3 green markers held their positions on the map, and the ocean beyond the island was dark.
But dark water and unknown distance are just variables, and variables are just things that haven't been measured yet.
Malika came out of the shelter at that moment, unable to sleep, and sat down with them without ceremony.
She looked at the expansion map in the interface and was quiet for a moment, then said that the soil 62 kilometers northeast would probably be different from volcanic.
He said, "Probably." She said, "I have seeds for that too."
And the 3 of them sat by the fire, while the island rested around them, and the system was quiet, and the next 21 days lay ahead like a chain of tasks, measurable, manageable, and worth every step.
Sora came out last, and she looked at the sky before she sat down, reading it the way she read terrain, for structure and direction.
She said, "Winds are favorable to the northeast at this time of year."
The 4 of them sat by the fire together, and the island built in 36 days breathed around them in the dark. He looked at the 3 of them, the surgeon who set fractures in strangers' ceremonial halls, the agronomist who held out a palm of earth as a greeting, the engineer who arrived mid-battle with questions already formed.
The system had sent them each at the exact moment they were needed, and not one of them had been wrong.
He thought, a system that selects this precisely across this many variables is not a tool. He thought it is something that understands what civilization requires before the people building it do. And maybe that was the nature of the thing he had set aside on the first day, the question of what the system was. Maybe it wasn't urgent because it was never truly separate from the answer he was already living.
The fire burned down to coals, and one by one the others went back to sleep, until only he was left in the quiet.
He looked at the expansion map for a long time. The dark ocean, the debris marker in the south, the distance line northeast.
Somewhere across that water there were others. The system had said so in 3 words, and the system did not waste words.
He thought about what they would find. Another island, another problem, another set of resources and obstacles arranged as a challenge.
Another group of people who had been dropped from a white flash into open water, calculating the angle, checking for injuries, looking for the stream. And if the system had selected them the way it had selected Irina, Malika, and Sora, then whoever they were, they already had something worth finding.
He would bring iron and medicine and seeds and walls and the most useful thing he had made on the island, a structure through which knowledge could move in every direction.
He would bring the coalition, not the people, but the logic of it, which travels lighter and is harder to destroy.
The first day on the island, he had nothing but a system and a mind that knew what to do with data.
36 days later, civilization progress stood at 41%. 3 tribes had become one coalition, and the forge that had started as a pit of coal and bark was running at 1240 degrees.
The distance between 0 and 41 is not large if every step is real,
and every step on this island had been real.
He lay back on the grass and looked at the sky, the same sky that had appeared when the white flash gave way and the reactor was gone.
He thought the reactor was a death, and the island was a beginning, and beginnings are always zero and always sufficient.
The system closed out day 36 with a timestamp, as it had done every night, without ceremony and without judgment. 3 green markers on the island map, 1 new marker on the ocean, 21 days in the departure window.
He let himself rest, because a physicist who ignores fatigue as a variable eventually loses precision, and precision was everything.
Sleep came quickly on the 36th night, and the system kept watch, and the island held its coalition steady in the dark.
He dreamed of nothing, which is what deep sleep looks like when the day's work was completed and the next day's work is already planned. In the morning, the expansion map would be the first thing he opened, and the boat design would be the first task in the log.
Wood, fiber, pitch from tree resin, and the shape determined by 62 kilometers of open ocean. The problem was already solved in principle.
Principle is where all real things begin, and real things are what the system asked for, and what the island delivered.
20 years old, dead in Novosibirsk, alive on Foundation Island. And the system didn't consider any of that a contradiction, and neither did he anymore.
The white flash had not been an ending. It had been the starting signal, and the race had only just begun.
The boat design took shape in the first hour of the 37th morning, drawn in the dirt beside the forge with an iron rod.
The hull needed to be shallow enough to build with island timber and wide enough to carry 4 people and supplies across 62 kilometers of open water.
Sora crouched beside the drawing and said nothing for 2 minutes, then made 3 corrections with her finger.
The corrections were right, and he accepted them without comment, because the structure of the thing mattered more than who drew the first line.
Taro sent his 2 best woodworkers to the camp that same morning, and they arrived carrying adzes made from the iron stock, tools built here, used here, for what came next.
The system opened a new entry in the technology log, Watercraft. Status, in progress.
Malika was already in the fields at dawn, and she moved through the rows with the focused calm of someone who understands that a harvest doesn't wait for plans to finish.
The Eastern elder watched her from the edge of the field, and his expression was the one he had worn since the well, a man who has stopped being surprised and started being curious.
Dakar sent 2 Varro divers to the debris site in the south, and they returned by midday with rope, a length of shaped timber, and a carved wooden pin unlike anything on the island.
The system scanned the pin and returned 1 line. Manufacturing technique, external origin, confidence, 87.
Someone had built a vessel elsewhere, and it had come apart here. And the ocean between this island and that somewhere was not empty. It was a road with a history.
Arena held the carved pin and turned it over in her hands, and her expression was the one she wore in the field when the diagnosis was clear, but the patient was unknown.
He placed the pin beside the forge and looked at the expansion map, and the debris marker in the south and the distance line to the northeast were now 2 separate pieces of the same question.
The system added a second marker to the ocean map, south, origin unknown, distance unconfirmed, and the map was no longer pointing in one direction.
He looked at the 2 markers and thought, the others are not in one place, and finding them is not a single voyage.
The system had said, find the others, plural, direction open, timeline undefined.
He picked up the iron rod and went back to the boat drawing in the dirt, and Sora sat beside him again, and the woodworkers were already selecting timber from the northern grove.
Civilization progress showed 41.6%, and every tab in the system had data in it, and the ocean tab had just become the most important one. The island had been built from 0 in 36 days, and the ocean ahead was simply a larger version of the same problem: 0 data, known physics, and a system that selects precisely.
He pressed the iron rod into the dirt and drew the first line of the hull, and the system logged the entry without ceremony. Watercraft, Day 1.